Damon Carmichael had ruled Liverpool's docks for years, controlling the flow of cocaine with an iron fist, while Arben Haksa was a rising Albanian operator whose reputation for ruthless efficiency stretched across Europe. When their worlds collided, the city's streets became a battlefield. Alliances fractured, quietly pulled the strings that would decide who survived and who vanished. This is the story of power, betrayal, and the globalization of crime that turned Liverpool into a war zone. Liverpool's docks had always been a place of shadows and whispers, a tangle of cranes, rusted shipping containers, and the occasional echo of boots on steel walkways. To outsiders, it was a city by the river, proud and industrious. But beneath that surface lay a hidden network of alliances and rivalries that few dared to acknowledge. For decades, the Carmichael crew had ruled this underworld with an almost invisible hand. Their operations were smooth, their territory respected, and their reputation for both loyalty and ruthlessness ensured that nobody dared challenge them openly. At the center of this quiet empire was Damon Carmichael, a man whose reputation had been built not on flashy violence, but on careful calculation. He knew the city, its docks, and its people like the back of his hand. To his rivals he was both a ghost and a storm, unseen until it was too late. Across Europe, far from Liverpool's grey skies, a different kind of ambition was stirring. Albanian crime syndicates had begun moving north from the Mediterranean, seeking new territories and new opportunities to traffic cocaine through ports that were poorly protected or easily corrupted. Among them was Arben Haksa, a man known for his sharp mind and unpredictable temper. Arben had built a reputation in Spain and Italy for his audacity and willingness to strike first, negotiate later. He understood the value of intimidation and efficiency and saw Liverpool as a city ripe for penetration. Unlike the Carmichaels, who relied on tradition and loyalty, Arben's crews operated with a cold pragmatism. Mistakes were not tolerated, hesitation punished. For him, territory was not earned, it was seized. As Arben's eyes turned to Liverpool, the city remained unaware of the storm approaching. Shipments that once traveled under the quiet watch of local crews began to show signs of disruption. Containers arrived faster, often with new, unfamiliar names on the paperwork. There were rumors of foreign faces on the docks, of men who spoke quickly and carried themselves with a different sort of confidence. To Damon, these changes were the first warning signs that the delicate balance of power was shifting. He had always known that outside forces might one day seek to exploit Liverpool, but he had never anticipated the audacity of someone like Arben. The first real clash was subtle, almost invisible. A container that should have gone through a routine check disappeared for a day, only to be found later, its contents slightly altered. Couriers were questioned more aggressively than usual, and minor thefts were traced back to unknown operatives. Damon's crew, trained to react swiftly but carefully, began investigating, only to find the trail leading not to rival local gangs, but to international actors moving with precision. Each discovery heightened the tension, a low hum of unease that spread through Liverpool's underworld. Meanwhile, Arben's perspective was no less complex. He understood that brute force alone would not win him the city. He needed insight into its operations, an understanding of its culture and loyalty networks. He dispatched scouts and informants, men skilled in reading human behavior as much as they were in handling firearms. His strategy was simple in theory: establish connections with the right individuals, learn the ropes, and slowly edge out local resistance without triggering a full-blown war. But even the most meticulous plans carry risk, and the unpredictability of the Carmichael crew made every move a calculated gamble. Caught between these converging worlds was Mira Vukovic, a shadowy figure whose presence went unnoticed at first. A former logistics expert with ties to Balkan crime networks, Mira had relocated to Liverpool quietly, observing both sides with a patient, analytical eye. She understood the value of information, and the leverage it could provide. To Damon, she appeared as a minor figure at first, a courier or administrative assistant, but her understanding of supply chains and cross-border trafficking made her a potential game-changer. To Arben, She was an enigma, someone who seemed loyal to neither but had the ability to manipulate outcomes to her advantage. As the docks continued their daily rhythm, with cranes swinging and containers being loaded and unloaded, the tension beneath the surface grew. Damon walked the pier late at night, eyes scanning faces he thought he knew, aware that an unfamiliar presence might be hiding in plain sight. Arbin, across the sea, was making calls, arranging shipments and testing the loyalty of potential collaborators. Neither man yet understood the full extent of the collision about to occur, nor the ways in which Liverpool's old traditions would come into contact with the raw force of globalization. The stage was set for a struggle over territory, respect, and survival, one that would bring both violence and uneasy alliances, forever changing the face of Liverpool's underworld. In the shadows, Mira watched both worlds with the patience of a predator. She understood that history often favors those who wait, and she was determined to see how far the fragile balance could stretch before it finally snapped. The uneasy truce between Liverpool's established criminal networks and the incoming Albanian operatives began with necessity rather than trust. A shipment worth over £5 million had arrived from Spain, routed through Rotterdam, and both Damon Carmichael and Arbin Hoxha knew that neither side could move it alone without drawing attention. The cargo had to pass through Liverpool's labyrinthine docks, loaded onto vehicles and distributed across the city's warehouses. For Damon, letting outsiders handle even a fraction of the operation was unthinkable. But refusal risked confrontation with a syndicate whose efficiency and ruthlessness he had already begun to respect and fear. The first meetings were tense, held in dimly lit warehouses where shadows masked every expression. Both sides came armed with enforcers and couriers, not entirely trusting the other to honor the terms of the agreement. Every gesture, every glance, became a test of intent. Arbin's men moved quickly, organizing containers, mapping routes, and establishing checkpoints for security. Damon's crew, used to operating with caution and slow, deliberate planning, felt disoriented by the foreign team's speed and apparent disregard for tradition. Each mistake or hesitation was punished with sharp reprimands or subtle threats, reminding Damon's men that the Albanians were not bound by the unwritten codes of Liverpool's streets. Despite the tension, practical considerations forced collaboration. Damon assigned trusted lieutenants to oversee the loading and distribution of the shipment, while Arbin's operatives handled coordination with suppliers in Spain and contacts in other European ports. Couriers who had spent years running drugs discreetly through the city now found themselves navigating intersections with armed outsiders who showed little patience for delay or error. Minor disagreements flared into shouting matches, but both sides recognized that a public conflict could attract police attention and ruin months of planning. Amid this fragile partnership, a third presence quietly reshaped the balance of power. Mira Vukovic had been observing both factions with careful scrutiny, noting weaknesses and opportunities that neither Damon nor Arbin had yet considered. Her expertise in logistics and international trafficking allowed her to anticipate problems before they arose. She began to manipulate information, feeding each side details selectively, nudging the operation in directions that maximized her own advantage. To Damon, she appeared indispensable, a calm mind organizing chaos, while Arbin saw her as a valuable informant who could smooth the rough edges of Liverpool's inefficiency. In truth, Mira answered to no one but herself, positioning herself as the invisible hand controlling the flow of cocaine and money. The uneasy truce began to take shape as shipments moved with an unprecedented efficiency. Liverpool's docks, once slow and predictable, now hummed with controlled chaos. Containers were loaded under the watchful eyes of Damon's trusted lieutenants, escorted by Albanian security teams, who monitored routes to ensure no interference from rival crews. On paper, the collaboration worked perfectly. In practice, every day brought new threats. Minor thefts, unreported delays, and moments of insubordination reminded both factions that trust had not been established, it had merely been postponed. Tensions escalated further when an internal dispute arose over payment. Arbin's men demanded a larger share, arguing that their efficiency had reduced the risks to Liverpool's operation. Damon's crew resisted, citing years of local knowledge and territorial expertise. Negotiations were heated, but ultimately brokered by Mira, who leveraged her understanding of each side's priorities to enforce a compromise. The resolution was fragile, a reminder that alliances built on convenience could collapse at the first sign of weakness. During this period, Jax Rivers, Damon's right-hand man, became a critical figure in maintaining discipline within the Liverpool faction. His presence reassured the crew and served as a deterrent to impulsive actions that might provoke the Albanians. Yet even Jax recognized that their position was precarious. Any misstep could spark violence that would destroy months of careful planning. Meanwhile, Arben's reputation for swift retaliation loomed like a shadow over the operation. Couriers who had previously walked confidently through the city now felt the tension in every encounter, aware that a single miscalculation could result in severe consequence. Despite the constant undercurrent of fear, some surprising cooperation emerged. Liverpool's crews began adopting elements of Albanian efficiency, streamlining delivery routes and communication channels. Arben's men in turn learned to navigate the idiosyncrasies of Liverpool's streets, respecting local networks, and avoiding actions that might draw unwanted law enforcement attention. The partnership was a delicate dance of pragmatism, mistrust, and mutual necessity. Yet beneath the surface, both Damon and Arben knew the truce could not last forever. Every move carried the weight of potential betrayal, and both factions were quietly preparing for the possibility that collaboration might fail. Mira, always 3 steps ahead, monitored their unease with satisfaction. She understood that the cracks in trust were opportunities to consolidate influence, positioning herself as an indispensable player in a conflict that was only beginning to unfold. The shipment was delivered, and on the surface, the operation appeared successful. But the uneasy alliance had exposed vulnerabilities, rivalries, and ambitions that neither side fully controlled. The streets of Liverpool had already begun to feel the pressure, and those watching from the shadows knew that the calm of cooperation was only temporary. Beneath it, the city's underworld was shifting, preparing for a collision that would change the rules of engagement forever. The fragile truce between Liverpool's established gangs and untouchable. In retaliation, Damon orchestrated strikes against key Albanian assets, targeting supply routes and trusted lieutenants in a calculated effort to send a message without exposing his own operation to police scrutiny. By this point, the city's underworld had changed irreversibly. Trust between the two factions evaporated entirely, replaced by suspicion, caution, and unrelenting tension. Couriers navigated the streets with a constant awareness that any wrong step could result in death. Enforcers and lieutenants worked long hours, always anticipating a strike, a betrayal, or an unexpected police raid. Amid the violence, the cocaine trade persisted, a testament to the resilience of both organizations and to Mira's unseen orchestration. Yet, even in the midst of chaos, alliances continued to form in unexpected ways. Minor Liverpool crews, previously loyal only to Damon, began covertly cooperating with Arben's men to secure protection or profit, creating a patchwork network that blurred the lines of allegiance. The city's underworld had become a complex battlefield of pragmatism, greed, and survival, and each day brought new acts of violence, new betrayals, and new strategies. Liverpool had been forever transformed. The streets were no longer ruled by tradition alone. They were a testing ground for globalization's collision with local power, a brutal dance where old loyalties met new ruthlessness, and in the midst of it all, Mira watched silently, shaping events from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to assert the ultimate advantage over both sides. The violence on Liverpool's streets had drawn attention far beyond the city's docks. What had begun as a local feud now bore the hallmarks of an international operation, and law enforcement agencies across Europe were starting to take notice. Interpol had intercepted encrypted communications, revealing a sophisticated network connecting the docks of Liverpool to ports in Spain, the Netherlands, and even Brazil. These communications hinted at supply chains, bribery networks, and money laundering strategies that were far beyond the scope of a typical street gang. Damon Carmichael and Arben Hoxha, once rivals and then uneasy partners, were no longer just players in a local turf war. They were participants in a global web of organized crime that had begun to attract attention on multiple continents. For Damon, this realization was both a threat and an opportunity. The Liverpool crews had long relied on the familiarity of their streets, their local networks, and a culture of loyalty that discouraged betrayal. Now, with Albanian methods seeping into operations, he recognized that his old strategies might no longer suffice. At the same time, he saw that this global attention could be manipulated. If handled carefully, international connections could provide access to new suppliers, new routes, and new markets. But the risks were enormous. One misstep could trigger raids, arrests, or the collapse of his carefully maintained empire. Arben, on the other hand, thrived in the chaos. His operations had always depended on precise logistics and ruthless efficiency, and the involvement of international authorities did not intimidate him. He had long anticipated interference from law enforcement and had built contingencies for almost every scenario. Yet even he recognized the value of local knowledge. The Liverpool crews, despite their temperamental pride, knew the docks, neighborhoods, and shipping routines better than any outsider could. This created a paradox. The success of the operation relied on cooperation with those they had once viewed as rivals. The negotiation between the two factions was delicate, mediated in large part by Mira Vukovic, whose influence had grown to unprecedented levels. She had become the linchpin in the operation, able to supply both Damon and Arben with critical intelligence, while keeping herself insulated from scrutiny. Mira had begun to position herself as indispensable, using her knowledge of cross-border trafficking and her understanding of human behavior to maintain a fragile balance. She advised on routes to avoid police detection, warned of potential informants, and subtly encouraged compromises that prevented open warfare. Her unseen hand ensured that cocaine continued to move through Liverpool, even as the streets remained tense with fear and uncertainty. Interpol's presence added a new dimension to the conflict. Surveillance operations, wiretaps, and sting attempts created an environment of constant pressure. Couriers were instructed to alter schedules, switch vehicles, and reroute shipments at the last minute. Each maneuver was a high-stakes gamble, a test of nerve and loyalty. The Albanians, used to efficiency and compliance, adapted quickly, while the Liverpool crews relied on instinct, local knowledge, and long-standing networks. Mira, however, remained the ultimate arbiter, guiding decisions with precision that no law enforcement agency could anticipate. Amid these pressures, the underworld of Liverpool began to change in fundamental ways. Minor crews, once subservient to Damon, started exploring opportunities with Albanian operatives, seeking protection, financial advantage, or simply a way to survive the escalating violence. These shifting allegiances created a complex patchwork of cooperation and competition. Damon and Arben, despite mutual distrust, were forced to accept this new reality, realizing that controlling every element of the network was no longer feasible. The city's underworld had become a hybrid ecosystem, blending local tradition with global ambition, pragmatism, and violence. Mira's influence continued to grow as both factions increasingly relied on her intelligence. She positioned herself as the neutral arbiter, the one figure capable of predicting and manipulating outcomes. When tensions threatened to erupt into open conflict, she intervened with precise, strategic information. When shipments risked exposure, she orchestrated diversions and contingency plans. Both Damon and Arben came to understand that Mira was more than a logistics expert. She was a master strategist, capable of controlling events from behind the scenes. Despite the increasing sophistication of their operations, both factions knew that the international attention was a ticking clock. Any misstep could trigger a major crackdown, leading to arrests, seizures, or the permanent collapse of their operations. The threat of exposure hung over every transaction, every shipment, and every decision. Yet paradoxically, the pressure also cemented the necessity of cooperation. Without coordination and careful planning, both factions risked losing everything they had built. By the end of this period, Liverpool's underworld was no longer simply a local network of gangs. It had become a microcosm of globalization in crime. International supply chains met local knowledge, violence intersected with diplomacy, and an unseen strategist ensured that the system functioned, Even amid chaos, the city had entered a new era, one in which the rules of engagement were defined not only by loyalty and tradition, but also by global ambition, intelligence, and the quiet, decisive hand of a single observer who understood the power of patience. The city of Liverpool held its breath as Operation Mercy Tide unfolded, a culmination of months of tension, violence, and clandestine maneuvering. Law enforcement had been quietly observing the movements of both the Carmichael crew and Arbin Hoxha's Albanian syndicate, aware that the stakes were higher than any local turf war. Interpol, the UK National Crime Agency, and specialized anti-drug units, coordinated with a precision that mirrored the criminal operations themselves. The authorities were prepared to strike at multiple locations simultaneously, targeting warehouses, safe houses, and vehicles suspected of carrying cocaine. But what neither side realized was that Mira Vukovic had already anticipated the operation, and her influence would determine the outcome. Damon Carmichael had sensed the tightening net for weeks. Whispers of surveillance, unexplained law enforcement presence near key docks, and unusual behavior among couriers had all set alarms ringing. He knew that if he acted rashly, months of meticulous work could be destroyed in hours. Arbin, on the other hand, treated the intelligence with a mix of caution and defiance. His crews continued operations as usual, believing that speed and efficiency could outpace the authorities. Both factions were unaware that Mira had already adjusted shipping routes, rerouted shipments, and created diversions to ensure that the bulk of the cocaine would reach its destination before the raid could make an impact. The night of the operation arrived under a heavy, foggy sky. Liverpool's docks were eerily quiet. Cranes silhouetted against the dim lights of the warehouses. Police and Interpol units moved in coordination, while both local and international surveillance systems monitored every container and vehicle. On the surface, it appeared that law enforcement would finally dismantle the colliding empires of Damon and Arbin. Yet Mira's careful orchestration ensured that only a small fraction of shipments were intercepted, giving both crews the illusion of vulnerability, while the majority of their operations remained intact. Her foresight turned what could have been a devastating blow into a controlled challenge, demonstrating her mastery of manipulation and strategy.